Pope Francis canceled my wedding. Although I'm being sensational with how I'm wording it, I'm not entirely making things up. This is a long story with a lot of background information, so stay tuned because this story is a little bit of a wild ride. First, we have to go over the basics of Catholic liturgy. In the Roman Catholic Church, the service we have is called Mass. I could spend hours talking about the Mass, but basically it's a time when the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross is supernaturally made present, and Jesus makes himself present in the Eucharist, which is also called communion. For a long time, Mass was said much differently from what you'd see today. If you see a Mass today, you'll probably see a building with carpet and drywalls, average Joes doing the readings, the priest going back and forth with the people as if the whole thing is a dialogue, but for most of church history, it was done quite differently. I grew up Catholic and went to Mass all my life without knowing that it was ever done differently. One week, I was hanging out with my cousins one last time before I went to college. We had to go to Mass in the morning and they mentioned that they went to the Latin Mass. I thought I'd tag along, but I'd probably be bored because I'd been to Mass in other languages before, and it was dreadful. I couldn't understand it, so I had to sit through an hour of what was, to me at least, essentially gibberish. I thought it would be similar, so I wasn't too excited. I was shocked when I got there. The Mass was at Old St. Mary's in Cincinnati. It was one of the most beautiful churches I'd ever been in. They had these little red booklets for people to follow along in, so I wasn't completely lost during the liturgy. The first thing I noticed is that the priest faced away from us. He wasn't talking to the congregation, he was talking to God. The level of silence and reverence involved was unparalleled by anything I had seen in my life to that point. It felt like you were at something sacred and transcendent. It wasn't a bunch of people running through a bunch of happy scripted dialogues with a bunch of smiles and rainbows the whole time. My life was changed a lot afterwards. I started praying every day, started saying the rosary, and I even got very involved with the church near me when I went to college. About a year into college, I met a girl at church one day. She was sweet, and we hit it off really well together. Given the title of this video, you probably already know where this is going. We started dating and got engaged after only 5 months. I knew she was the one. I'll be going over the whole story when I make my 1-year anniversary video, but we were both Catholic and we both loved tradition. She had also been to the traditional Latin Mass and we both loved it. When we got engaged, we knew we wanted it to be a Latin Mass for our wedding. Side note for non-Catholics, when Catholics get married, they usually have a Mass set along with their wedding ceremony. She wanted to be proposed to in a church, so I picked a random one to do it. We found out later, the priest there does the TLM, which is short for traditional Latin Mass. We decided we wanted to get married at that church, and we told the priest we wanted to do a TLM wedding. The priest was happy to do it, and we had everything set in place. Now, something that happened in the background is that in July of 2021, a month before I got engaged, Pope Francis released a document called Traditionis Custodes. This heavily restricted the use of the TLM. It made it so no new groups could be created to say Mass the old way, and any new priest who wanted the right to say it needed permission from the Pope himself, and the bishops had the right to get rid of any existing TLM groups if they wanted to. But we were technically in the guidelines. It was after the releasing of this document that my wife and I got engaged, and the priest said we could have our TLM wedding. Then, in December of 2021, Pope Francis released a follow-up document restricting the groups who say the TLM even more than he did before. My fiance and I didn't know if we could still have our TLM wedding, so we contacted our priest and asked about it. He said after these new guidelines were released, he was informed that he could no longer say our wedding Mass according to the old way. This was, of course, incredibly frustrating, and my fiance and I started joking already that Pope Francis had canceled our wedding. But the story doesn't end there. Our priest decided to say Mass according to the new way of doing it, or the Novus Ordo, but still in Latin. The differences between these two liturgies would take me a huge amount of time to explain, so I'll not address it here. But close to the wedding, about a month or two out, my dad read over Traditionis Custodes and the follow-up document again. He noticed a couple of things that would help our case. Mainly, the document only addressed groups in the church that were centered around saying it, such as the Fraternity of St. Peter or the Institute of Christ the King. But it never addresses the bishop's right to allow a specific priest to say the traditional Mass. Therefore, the bishop still has the right to grant permissions to priests to say a single wedding Mass if he's not part of a larger group. Originally, my dad was going to explain the whole argument to me so that I could email my priest about it and he could speak to our bishop. But as the wedding got closer, he decided that it would be best to write to the bishop directly because we didn't have much time, and going through a 4-person chain of communication would be too difficult. So he wrote him a letter and explained in it why he was writing it himself instead of me, and explained the argument in detail. I've linked the full letter in the description box. I highly recommend you read it, it's only about 3 pages. In addition, I'll be linking in the description box a book that my uncle and my dad wrote together, responding to a letter Pope Francis had written about why he had restricted the use of the traditional Mass. We got a response back from the bishop soon after this, and I have here the full text of his letter. It's very short. I'll go ahead and read it in its entirety. This is to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated March 19th, 2022, concerning your son's upcoming wedding. First and foremost, please extend my congratulations to your son and his fiancée as they prepare to embark on the sacred adventure of beginning their marriage and family. As Father John Hollowell had made clear to your son, the permission to celebrate the wedding within the extraordinary form, which is the traditional Latin Mass, is not to be granted. Such clarification on the instructions of Pope Francis's motu proprio, Traditionis Custodes, was provided by the Holy See earlier this year. While this is obviously important to you, given your extensive letter, it is interesting that your son and his bride-to-be did not make the request for their wedding. With assurance of my prayers and best wishes for your family, I remain, sincerely yours in Christ, Archbishop Charles Thompson. I'll go ahead and link a scan to this letter in the description box. I'll be blocking out parts of it because it does include my dad's full name and address, so obviously I have to edit that out, but the whole thing is in the description, a scan of it if you want to read it. But basically, he completely ignored the arguments we had given him. He also accused my dad of being the only one who wanted it because I never asked about it myself. But this is not true because I did ask for it. Twice. I guess the title for this video is not entirely accurate because it wasn't just Pope Francis who canceled my wedding, it was my Archbishop who did as well. But the wedding still went really well and everything went really smoothly. Okay, that's a complete lie. It was a mess and everything fell apart at almost every single level. I don't think I'll ever witness a wedding as messy and hectic as my own, but that's a story for another day. On May 28th, 2023, the 1-year anniversary of my wedding, I'll release a 1-year reflection video. It'll go over how I met my wife, what it was like getting engaged so quickly, the wedding itself, and what it's like to be married at 20 years old. So be sure to subscribe so you can see that video when it comes out because trust me, it's a good story.